Today's guests are Christina Fernandez-Valle and Stacey Dunn. We join their conversation in the faculty lounge.
Not do a postdoc and come right into a faculty position. And psychologists were so much in demand at that time that you could do that. But in my field, it's like you finish your Ph.D., which takes you 5 years, and then off you go to do 1 or 2 postdocs. So I was lucky I was able to postdoc at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis at the University of Miami. Mm-hmm. And I had as mentors the most wonderful couple that I could have ever had, Drs. Richard and Mary Bunge. And they had a longstanding research laboratory at University of Washington, or Washington University of St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And then they decided to move to Miami and do more translational work, trying to use Schwann cells, which are myelinating glia in the peripheral nervous system, tried to develop that into use as a therapy for spinal cord injury. So they moved their whole operation to University of Miami at the same time I was finishing my Ph.D. So I thought, well, I could move, and I had offers elsewhere all across the country. I could have gone to San Diego or Oregon, San Francisco, and then I decided to stay in Miami because it was like one of the best labs. So after that, I was also trying to be adventurous. I could have gone maybe to there was a university in New Orleans and one at University of Alabama in Birmingham. And I thought, well, UCF, I thought it was a good match at the time because it allowed me to do my research. It was a growing university, and it was also a teaching undergraduate university. And the other positions I was looking at were all medical schools, where you need to support yourself off of research grants all the time. And I thought, no, let me play it safe. You know, if something happens to my research funding, then I at least have a 9-month contract and I can teach. So luckily, it's been 11 years and I haven't lost my research funding yet, and I'm still funded. And I just put in a grant for the next round to National Institutes of Health.
What are you looking at now?
Right now, so historically I focused on the biology of these Schwann cells and how they develop and form myelin, which allows the nervous system to communicate. So your brain communicates to your limbs, and you can feel things from in your skin, because of the Schwann cells that ensheath the axons that connect the brain to the periphery. So I've studied that for more than 11 years, like 15 years. And then when I started my lab at UCF, I realized that the Schwann cell also has another one. It's a pathology of the Schwann cell is that in certain diseases like neurofibromatosis type 2 or type 1, the Schwann cell, instead of making the myelin sheath, forms a tumor. And there's a very common disorder called neurofibromatosis type 1. It's about 1 in 3,000 incidence rate. And the Schwann cells there form tumors. And in NF2, they also form tumors. And in that case, they form tumors in the nerves in the ear. And I was studying cell communication pathways. So there's chains of proteins inside a cell that talk to one another and tell the cell nucleus, like the command center, what's going on outside the cell. So the cell knows when it's supposed to proliferate, make more copies of itself, or when it's supposed to stop dividing and make a myelin sheath. One of the proteins I was studying was actually mutated in this disease, and it was in the pathway I was already studying. So for the past 6 years, I've spent most of my time studying what happens to the cell that causes it to become abnormal and form tumors. So this disease is the NF2 disease. First starts to manifest in children about, in the second decade of life, 10 to 15 years of age, they'll start losing hearing. And you'll go in for hearing tests and, they're definitely losing hearing. And if you have an MRI done, you've got tumors behind each ear toward the brainstem. And they're very slow-growing tumors. So hopefully, you might have them till you're 20, 30, and nothing will happen. Other times they grow rather quickly and they can impinge on your hearing and you can become totally deaf. So
is that treatable?
It's treatable with surgery if they grow really large. Surgery always has, the risk of causing permanent damage. And depending where the tumor is, you have to remove the whole nerve, which leaves you totally deaf. You can damage facial nerves, so you have problems in moving your facial muscles. So you can't smile, you might have trouble eating. So it's not a really, it's not a acute disorder that's going to end your life immediately, but it's a chronic disorder that hopefully is manageable. And but it does cause a lot of morbidity, and quality of life goes down. There's another disorder, the NF1 disorder, which is much more disfiguring. You're talking about body image earlier. It's a different genetic disorder that affects the same Schwann cell, and it causes tumors to form on your skin, just underneath your skin, so your whole body is covered with little bumps. It's very common, so you've probably seen a lot of people where they're just covered with bumps. And some of them are small, and some are so small you can't remove them, and so numerous you can't remove them. And some are rather large. And then there's some that form plexiform neurofibromas that are in deep tissue, and those can become very large and just totally disfiguring. So, and there's some incidence of learning disabilities and other problems with blood pressure and bones.
How common are these disorders?
NF1 is really common. It's 1 in 3,000. It's the most common inherited disease. NF2 is less common. It's about 1 in 30,000 individuals, but it's more common than cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy put together. So it's just not recognized as one. So one of the things I'm really happy that we've been able to do in the last few years is I became a a board member for the Children's Tumor Foundation for the Florida chapter. And at the same time, the National Foundation, Children's Tumor Foundation, which used to be called the National Neurofibromatosis Foundation. But because the name was so long, they changed it to Children's Tumor. They've organized this national network of clinics where they want to provide a certain standard of care for individuals with NF1 and NF2. And there's a third form called schwannomatosis that's newly recognized. And then have clinics throughout each state abide by or agree to abide by a certain standard of care and provide care for children and adults. Because there's an issue with, as the child grows into adulthood, many times you cannot use the same physicians you've been using throughout your life. Many times you lose your coverage for health insurance, and they can't get it. So they've wanted to create a series of clinics that will provide for these individuals from their childhood into their adulthood. And we've been able to, in the last 6 months, not negotiate, but encourage 2 different organizations in the state of Florida to create a clinic and to make the application, the formal application to the center, to the National Center for Children's Tumor Foundation. And we're going to end up having probably 2 or more clinics that are affiliated with the National CTF that will have all the resources you need to be seen, because it's so frustrating with these newly diagnosed families to find the physicians in the community that know how to first diagnose and then what to do with the child after you've diagnosed that it has, she or he has NF1 or 2.
And imagine getting connected with families who are dealing with this is important too. It sounds like it could be fairly devastating for a family, despite the lack of threat maybe to one's life, right? I mean, you mentioned it's not going to necessarily kill you, but there are challenges that a lot of other people won't be able to relate to.
It's amazing. It's amazing how these families, cope when you have one special needs child with any special needs. But there's so many clinical problems. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of the families, and they're saying, okay, we've gotten through this stage of the disease, and now we're just waiting for the next one to come. And it's just, in one of the cases, one of the side or complications of NF1 is that your bone, your tibial bone, bows. Instead of growing straight, it bows. So it basically leaves you unable to walk. And in extreme cases, you have to, and the bone is very brittle and it keeps breaking and it doesn't heal back correctly. So many of the children just decide to have their leg amputated because trying to care for that leg is so painful, so time consuming, and so disruptive for their normal life that they, now with such great prosthetics, they just amputate the leg, put on their prosthetics, and then they go and at least they dealt with that stage of the disease. Then they've always got the worry of one of their tumors could become a malignant tumor, which happens in about 10% of the cases in NF1 patients. So the families always live kind of like, they learn to live with anxiety and accept it, but you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. There's tumors that grow in the optic nerve, so it can, and also there's bony dysplasia, so the bones of the face can grow. So one side of your face can be totally beautiful, normal. The other side could have, be deformed because of bony tumors. So you look at some of these young kids and they're like, 14, 15, 16, and they're living with this. And they've got good attitudes and they're like accepting of it. And then you've got, like you've been talking, some that look
perfect and they're unhappy. And families can be so inspiring. A lot. My research is in body image, but all my volunteer work has been with American Cancer Societies, reaching out to kids with cancer. And I love that work because of my sense that they really get it about life so early, to have that threat and watch the families come together because they really do know what's important. It sounds like the families who are affected by this or these diseases really have something similar in that they really have to find a way to have strength to get through so many unknowns.
Yeah, and it's great because you see that some of the families have an affected, their sibling is not affected. So there's a normal sibling and then the one that has the disorder. And it's so great to see the younger siblings or the older siblings take care of the sick one and fundraise. There was one of our families has an older sister that wrote a book about her younger brother and illustrated it and had it published as a fundraiser for her brother Joe. And everybody Joe is just this special person, and he's outgoing and friendly, and he actually attracts people to him that love him so much that all of a sudden they're part of the fundraising machinery, and they do whatever they can to get enough community involvement so that we can have these clinics, statewide clinics, because that's something I hear over and over again. People call up and I've just been diagnosed, who do I go see? And typically you had to go to Birmingham, Alabama, or you had to go to Boston.
And now?
And now you can probably stay right here in Orlando. Through Florida Hospital, we're working with the neuro-oncology group, and they put together an application, and very soon they should be approved, and they will be an affiliated clinic for the Children's Tumor Foundation.
That's great. How will the new med school affect your career
that's so
here?
Exciting. That's great. When I came in 1996, I saw the promise of UCF. They had the research park. I thought this could be a research triangle like in North Carolina. This could be great. And it's taken a while, but it is happening. I hear the research park is like filled out. It's bad for the environment.
Right.
I see, I'm in the research park, and every time they come and they clear some land and the pine trees get bulldozed, and they do take them away and recycle them. And then you see all the wildlife running around. You feel sad because it was such a serene area. But I guess that's the price of progress.
Development.
Yeah. But now they're building the medical school not on campus. They're building it down in Lake Nona. So it's going to be the medical city. So we have the medical school building going up eventually. We've already started with the biomolecular science building, which is a 4-story building or 5-story building just for research, biomedical research. And the amazing thing is that we're building this new 4-story building, and it's not big enough for the faculty we have. They need more space, so we're probably going to have to split our faculty and have half of us stay on campus, and another half go to the new building in Lake Nona.
Right.
The VA hospital has agreed to build a hospital in Orlando, and it'll be in Lake Nona. The Burnham Institute, which is a 100% research institute in San Diego, they're building, they broke ground, I think not so long ago, they broke ground there for their building. I'm not sure how large their building is, but they, with help from the state of Florida, they have $300 million in incentives. They're going to build an operations here and hire like 30 to 300 researchers. University of Florida wants to have a presence down there. MD Anderson Cancer Center Orlando wants to have a building there and is negotiating with UCF to maybe use some of our building space until they get their building set. So there's going to be at least 4 to 5 different community and new research organizations out there. So only good things can happen. It's good for our community, it's good for our students.
So many more opportunities. I mean, you've made so much happen without this substantial medical community tied to UCF. So I can only imagine what great things you and other researchers like you, and even many of us in psychology, see so many ties to the new medical school and all of the associated facilities. I think it is going to be really neat for Central Florida.
It's going to take a long, long time to develop, because I came from, and USF has a medical school. And were you part of the medical school? Is that where?
No, we borrowed their library on occasion, but no, we had really very little affiliation. I think UCF really values interdisciplinary work, though, and so I would imagine we're going to see a lot of cross between departments and traditionally non-medical units wanting to participate in all that's going on there.
I think they're going to have to, because, I mean, we're starting so late with our medical school. I mean, when I was in University of Miami as a technician for a long time, well, not for a short time, and then as a graduate student, and then as a postdoc. So I was in this medical environment for 11 years, and it's an amazing operation to build and to keep going. And we're starting, and medical school is for a lot of the income. There's 2 sources of income for medical school. One is the clinical revenue, and one is the overhead off of federal research grants. And those are very important. And the Burnham Institute is operated mostly through overhead from federal research grants. And a lot of the institutions, research institutes, have a policy where the scientists pay their own salary. That's one of the nice things about being in a state university, is that they value teaching, and we have a teaching mission, and we're paid to teach, as well as do the research. So we're starting this brand new medical school when the federal coffers for research are kind of depleted. So it's really tough to get federal grants, and and right now, the clinical revenue isn't going to be there right away. So we're going to need a lot of community help, a lot of state help to get both medical schools started, because the state also approved a medical school in Miami at Florida International University.
Right.
And they have the University of Miami not too far away, and they have University of Miami opened I think it's a second medical school with Florida Atlantic University. So it used to be that they only helped teach the first 2 years of medical school. And I'm not sure if that's still the arrangement they have. But the state, medical schools are very expensive to start and run and keep going.
And develop that reputation. And it seems to me like it's going to draw professionals like you who have a sense of vision. You came to UCF not really sure about what that was going to turn out to be like, and it's
pioneers.
Pioneers, and drawing people who aren't looking to be part of some known entity with a national reputation of excellence, but to be part of building that and making it happen.
Right.
So it could be exciting.
That's the pioneering spirit of the first dean of the medical school, Dr. Deborah German. She's just a wonderful person. She's come in, and there's nothing she can't do. I've been amazed. I've met her a number of times, and I've seen what she's been able to accomplish within the first 6 weeks she was here. And I just have to, like, you know, applaud her over and over again, because to come into a university where they don't quite understand what it is
Right.
to build a medical school, but they know they want it. It's a great goal to have. But if you actually knew what you were getting yourself into, you know, sane people might say, no, we don't want to go there. But it's like that in science too. If you think you know everything, or if you know what the path is going to be, you may not get into it. You just have to go because you have a passion for it, or you think this is helpful for the community. And it really is. Orlando is such a big city. To have, you know, eventually world-class healthcare and health and medical education. Not that we don't have world-class healthcare, we do, but that education component where you're always on the leading edge instead of following, you're at the leading edge. That's something that will come about because of the medical city.
And when you talk about being on the leading edge, and I try to picture your lab and working with your students, you know, I always joke in my lab sometimes, like, it's not like we're trying to cure cancer here, but you are.
Yeah, we are.
So what's that like in your lab working? What kind of people are drawn to Schwann cell research?
Good question. I like the connection with the community, because it's very easy to be in your lab doing research, and it's all about, you know, publishing the paper, you know, and making sure you make from assistant to associate professor. It's all about you and your career. And then it's about their students and their career. But what I learned working at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis is that if you can see the face of the people you're going to help, it really inspires you to go back in the lab after a bad day and keep working. So there we had the spinal cord injured individuals were there in their wheelchairs, and the families come in, and at first they're devastated by the loss and the injury, but then they develop this inner sense of, I wouldn't say acceptance, but they kind of realize what life is all about. They value it, and they're determined to make things better. So they have this just a sense, and you see their urgency too, and you're like, you know, you walk outside your lab and there they are saying hi, and you get to know them all, and you're like, I have to work hard for them. I need to really focus, not on me, but focus on why I'm doing this. And if I can't get excited about that, then I'm in the wrong field, and I better go, you know, change fields.
Having that real face attached to what could be very theoretical and disconnected from
the ivory tower with all the you know, smart people sitting there and, you know, thinking thoughts. But when I go to these quarterly board meetings, and, you know, all the moms and dads and grandmas and the kids are there, and you're like, okay, this is what I need to do. So then you're able to go back into the lab, and you realize you have a responsibility to educate your students so they can get a good job afterwards. So they can, and not even get a good job, it's so they can find where they need to be in life. So I'm just graduating my first Ph.D. student, Courtney, and she'll be with me for about 5 years. And there's something that happens, I'm not sure if you experienced this. I know I experienced it as a Ph.D. student. At about third year, you know, mark in time, you're like, I've had enough. I know enough. I want to finish. I want to graduate. I just want to leave. And at about 3 years, I think you know how to manipulate your system, you have basic information, but you haven't quite matured. There's a certain amount of, you have to learn, you have all this data, you have to learn how to analyze it, assemble it into a story, write it, and then there's a certain, your brain just takes that long. For most people, it does take 4 to 5 years. So at 3 years, we had this meeting where we were like, oh, we're not getting along. But after that, I'm so pleased to say that we've been able to go beyond that, and she's produced some really nice work. And I just kept saying, you just have to do what you really want to do and what's best for you. Don't worry about everything else. Don't worry about how long so-and-so stayed in the program, or someone got out before me and they only produced one paper. It's not about comparing yourself to everybody else, which is what I was always told when I was a postdoc by Mary Bunge. It's all about, where do you want to go in your life? What kind of life do you want to live? And if you're going to stay in academic science, you might need more rigor than if you're going to go and teach high school, which is, teaching high school is a very important job. And if you can bring passion about your science to the high school students, then you're going to change their lives. So maybe, the student that got out with one paper, which you can't do anymore. We have, programmatic standards, but there's always the quality of paper. There's the,
Right.
quantity versus quality. We all want to publish lots of papers, but how good are those papers? And so,
Sounds like you clearly have passion for the research, and what's neat is I hear an equal excitement or passion for mentoring and teaching, and it's so easy to get caught up in our own research and where we want our research to go, but to really recognize our important role in helping to nurture and raise these other future researchers, teachers, parents. And one of my students said to me, almost as a secret, I think I'm going to go clinical, like be a therapist.